Now, as we all know, the world of Super Mario is mostly known for one thing: incredibly fun platforming games. However, throughout the years, Nintendo started to make more and more weird titles where Mario and his friends were doing completely different things compared to the normal menu. Think of ice skating, soccer, minigames, and so much more. And most of these aren't fantastic. For every good one, you get a bad one. That's how I see it, at least. However, out of all of these, one is king, and every version they have released so far has been very fun. I'm of course talking about Mario Kart. Personally, this is my favorite out of all the spin-off titles, but recently I found out about another that I haven't seen or heard of before: Yoshi Racing. So today we will look into this strange game. What is it about? What did it look like? Who was going to make it? And what happened to it? Well, let's dive right in. But first, introducing my new store, Wily.gg, the place to buy your new games and get your hands on eShop cards for Nintendo as well as Xbox. And don't forget, use code Wily at checkout to save 10%. Now let's continue. Now our story begins in the early 90s, with British game developer Argonaut Games, who had just finished working on Star Fox, a game developed in collaboration with Nintendo for the SNES. This was the second 3D Nintendo game after X for the Game Boy in 1992, and the first Nintendo game to use polygonal graphics achieved with the Super FX graphics chip included in the cartridge. Now this game received critical acclaim and is often considered one of the greatest video games of all time, and so both Nintendo and Argonaut Games were proud of what they had achieved. Together they made amazing games during the early years of the NES and SNES and pioneered new technologies. And so Argonaut Games had an idea for a new type of game, a 3D platformer and racer that would be quite weird. They quickly threw together a prototype featuring Nintendo's character Yoshi, and as you can imagine from the name Yoshi's Racing, it was also going to be a racing game, not just a platformer. Now, we knew nothing about this potential Yoshi game until years later, when Eurogamer mentioned it in an article about Argonauts and Nintendo's partnership on Star Fox. The article describes the game as a platformer, but a 2005 post on a fan site and a post by an Argonaut employee on the message board NeoGAF instead refers to it as a racing game. So to be honest, most people aren't sure what it is exactly. Now clearly the company was working on something that could have been revolutionary, and so Jassan, the founder of Argonaut, showed the game to Nintendo and really hoped that they would approve it. But the company was not willing to take the risk of entering an entirely new field with an outside developer, which is to an extent understandable because it would be risky. Nintendo was known for delivering amazing quality and were the dominant player in the video game industry at the time. Sure, they were facing stiff competition from companies like Sega and PlayStation who were entering the arena, but they were still king at the time and very protective of their IPs. And so they rejected this game, a game that would have been the first 3D Mario-related title ever. But this isn't where the story ends, because this is actually a story of betrayal as the two companies had a falling out. Before this Yoshi idea, the relationship between the two had already been damaged by the cancellation of the nearly completed Star Fox 2, which didn't make the cut because while the game looked good and all, it wasn't good enough compared to the competition who were creating better looking games at this point. This was already a bad start, but it all became even more dire thanks to Yoshi Racing, because some people think Nintendo actually stole ideas from the demo. Now at this point I will quote from a post made by one of the employees of Argonaut Games, but some people say this isn't properly verified, so take it all with a grain of salt. Alright, here we go. Okay, so I heard about how some people think Nintendo had stolen the idea for Super Mario 64 from an unreleased Argonaut game called Yoshi Racing. Well, do I have a bombshell for you guys. I was a programmer at Argonaut from 1992 until it was liquidated in 2004, so I've seen stuff that no one else has outside the company. While we were working on Star Fox 2, my mate Giles let me see a secret project that he was working on. It seemed to be some sort of console, later revealed to be the Ultra 64, hooked up to his computer through a dev kit. He booted up the monitor to reveal a low-poly Yoshi in a go-kart driving around a flat plane next to his house. There were no animations, a lot of simple textures, and no real content other than driving around. But I was impressed at the frame rate he was getting, around 35 FPS with a little bit of stutter here and there. And the 3D effects looked great, but the skybox choice was a little unsettling, if not creepy. Giles said that he would present the ROM to Nintendo in hopes that they could develop the flagship title for the system. I guess it didn't go so well, because if I brought it up again in conversation, Giles would get quite sour and deny its existence. Now, a couple of years later, I was playing Super Mario 64. I had collected around 34 stars and entered Wet Dry World. And as I started the first star, my jaw dropped. The skybox was the exact same as the one in Yoshi Racing. Now, clearly, according to this old developer, Nintendo actually stole some of their ideas and used it in their own game. And he wasn't the only one claiming this apparently, because Jazz San, the founder of Argonaut, claimed that Super Mario 64 had the same look and feel of the Yoshi Racing prototype. And in the 2020 Nintendo Giga Leak, an early Yoshi model that was made by Argonaut was supposedly found. As you can see, it looks very basic as well as rough. And that's because while the Super FX chip was quite powerful, more advanced 3D models than this one weren't really possible. Now, I will say that some people claim that this model isn't actually from Yoshi Racing, but a completely different game. But personally, I'm not sure. Now, it is said that aside from taking inspiration from Argonaut's prototype, Nintendo also hired 3 of Argonaut's programmers that created the Yoshi prototype to work on Super Mario 64. So as you can see, the whole situation has a bit of a betrayal arc to it all. And a lot of people are split on this issue. If Nintendo would have allowed Argonaut to create their Yoshi game, then they would have gone down in history as the creators of the first 3D platformer instead of Nintendo. And so some people came to the conclusion that Shigeru Miyamoto stole Super Mario 64 from Argonaut, and he apparently regrets it, because Jazz San also recalls an occurrence where Shigeru Miyamoto came to him and apologized for not picking up the Yoshi game. But again, I will say, there are a lot of mixed emotions and opinions surrounding all of this. Some people agree, while others say a lot of the stuff mentioned online is false. So again, take it all with a grain of salt. Now in the end, Argonaut did make something out of this Yoshi Racing demo, because they decided to retool the prototype into an original IP known as Croc, Legend of the Gobos. This was a platformer game developed by Argonaut Games and published by Fox Interactive. The game was an early example of a 3D platformer title, being released in North America in September 1997 for the PlayStation, and later on that year for the Sega Saturn and Microsoft Windows. However, it never came out on a Nintendo console, which was most likely done for a reason. It takes place in the fictional setting of the Gobo Valley, where you follow a young crocodile named Croc, who sets out to rescue a group of furry creatures known as Gobos from the evil magician Baron Dante. Now in the end, the game received mixed to positive reviews from critics. Praise was directed towards the game's visuals, music and sound, while criticism was directed towards the controls and camera. But in the end, it went on to become one of Argonaut's most successful releases, selling over 3 million copies for the PlayStation alone, and so a sequel to the game titled Croc 2 was released in 1999. So in the end, the company was able to make their own 3D game. Sure, it wasn't exactly what they had in mind, but still, it's cool that they were able to make what they wanted. And now we all finally know the story behind Yoshi Racing. And I've covered more stuff like this in other videos, so be sure to check them out. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. My voice is still a bit wonky. I'm doing all these voiceovers while I'm still a bit sick, so there's a lot of garbage in my throat and in my nose and stuff, but it finally felt good enough to give it a shot, and I kind of have to because I was running out of voiceover scripts. I hope it was still good. Thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe. I'm doing a lot of effort and this is hard on my throat. I love you all. Subscribe, like, bell button, do